Hello, everyone. Thank you for tuning into Mayshad Choice Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Conversation. I'm Neza Alawi, founder and CEO of Mayshad Choice, the New York-based company committed to empowering women on a daily basis. With my team, we produce content, events, and workshops to advance women's business development, and we offer a networking platform for women to connect to resourceful tribe who shares the same value. I'm here today with Jan Mercer-Dams, our VP Development, and our guest speakers, Katy Soriano and Carmen Hughes.
Hi, everyone. Welcome. Thank you, Neza. It's great to be with everyone again this week. As Neza mentioned, this is our Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion series brought to you by Mayshad Choice. We invite everyone to tune in and subscribe to our live YouTube stream. In addition to check out our website at joinmayshad.com, which lists all of our upcoming programs and our events. We're thrilled to have pivoted very quickly in month number 2 of COVID-19 to bring you all things related to helping women lead inspired, productive, and happy lives professionally and personally. Join us each and every week for this series at our Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion series. On Wednesdays, we have our workshop series. On Thursdays, we have and host Mayshad Women in Money. And on Mondays, we kick off each and every week with Dr. Risa Reiger, our clinical psychologist and one of our fabulous Mayshad Choice investors. Neza, thank you so much for hosting us today.
Thank you, Jan. So our two experts today have a deep expertise in workplace culture, recruiting and staffing, employee engagement, and inclusion. Katy Spriano, Director of Operations at BANKW Staffing, formerly Partner and Director of Recruiting at Winter Women, and Carmen Hughes, CEO and Founder, Edelweiss Consulting, former Global Head of People and Talent at fintech company Chillplay. Carmen was also the Head of Diversity at Handle Group, a corporate consulting and coaching company, and a 20-year Wall Street veteran with JP Morgan. Hello, Carmen. Hi, Katy.
Hello.
Hello. You here today.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you. I'm going to start with a question to both of you, but Katy, if you can lead. So for most of us, we are into month 2 of remote work. The pandemic has been referred to as the most massive experiment in telecommuting. How are the needs of employees, managers, leaders different right now? What are you seeing from our company and the companies of your clients? And what has shifted from month 1 to month 2? What are we learning?
Sure. I mean, I think, the past decade has really made us all explore, remote work. And as that's become much more popular for many companies, you've sort of been allowed as an employer to have this choice, whether or not you are going to be pro work from home or work from home on a part-time basis, or sort of against it and saying, it doesn't work for our company, for our culture, for our business. And being forced into it makes everybody need to make it work. And it's not an immediate thing, I don't think, that a lot of people can just be comfortable with. So I think it really takes a good relationship with a manager and employee to say, hey, here's what I need working from home. If you're used to having daily conversations with your boss that are just organic because you're passing each other in your offices, I think you need to respect that and know, okay, we probably do need a touch point daily so that things still feel normal. But I certainly think that right now, as this is going on and everybody's adapting, we all kind of need to give each other, cut each other a little bit of slack on just how we operate from home, because everybody's dealing with a different, at-home environment.
Thank you, Katy. Carmen, what would you have to say on this?
Yeah, I think Katy hit the nail right on the head. It's really about being flexible and adapting with everything that you're learning about. Managers really need to be intentional at this time and really asking their employees what they need and not assuming. This has been a great time for people to actually feel like they can actually speak up. And I think that's something that's really special. And I hope that continues and we see more of that. But managers really need to look at one size fit all doesn't work anymore, especially as we look at all of the things that have happened over the last month. I mean, now we have virtual learning. I have 4 people in my household who are on the internet at the same time. And, we're all trying to work and homeschool and cook. And so much has changed. And so we really need for the workplace to embrace that. This has truly been the largest work at home experiment ever. And the great thing is that we're seeing it, that is actually working. And it'll be fun to watch how this evolves.
It's interesting to both Carmen and Katy. We've known you in our Mayshad ecosystem of professional women for quite some time now, even before COVID-19. And what I think is really interesting about our conversation today is that both of you have deep experience working with Fortune 500, very large companies, to fintech, emerging startups, and everything in between, from different sides of the table as well. So you've been corporate recruiters, you've been on the talent side, on the diversity and inclusion side, and you've owned companies, you've reinvented and pivoted and worked in really diverse environments. And I'm wondering, as we think through, just honestly what COVID looks like right now as it pertains to remote work, versus what do you envision based upon your experiences the future to look like? Like, if you could think through from an employment perspective and best case scenario, what would you envision for the future? What would you like it to look like as an employer? And Carmen, we'll start with you and then go to Katy.
Yeah, I think this work at home environment is going to play out further. And I think that it's going to really allow the opportunities to diversify the workplace. A lot of times you would hear companies say, in our general proximity, there just aren't diverse people, and that's why our workforce is not as diverse. But now that we're seeing all the talents that people have and we can actually be very productive from home, it really does open the door for recruiters and for workplace to be more creative with how they're going to attract talent and how they're going to get talent in the door, and then how they're going to make the best use of that talent. So I think from a diversity and inclusion perspective, this is really, a great opportunity to show that it works and that you really can, touch more people.
Carmen, in tapping into that a bit further, as well as that, how do you see this in a way potentially leveling some of the playing field as we think about what diversity and inclusion could look like?
It does level the playing field in a lot of ways. And, if I just look at, my household as an example, we're all really getting an in-depth lens to what our days look like and what our responsibilities are and how we all need to shift and be more flexible and adaptable to help one another to make it all work. And I think that adaptability, that shift just within the household, we're going to see that play out in the workforce as well. You're really getting a really closer lens into what people are dealing with. We joke about when we see the newscasters coming on the news, what does their background look like? Oh, wow, you get a kind of a glimpse into their home. You see the pictures on their desk and in their offices and what they're choosing. So I think each Zoom, we get a new lens into someone else's life, and that will bring us a lot more closer from an inclusion standpoint, and then just allowing us to be our authentic selves.
That's interesting. So in a way, it almost humanizes the conversations a bit more too, right? And so it helps you understand who someone is as a person, and helps you to understand also how they identify and with whom they identify, and the stories by which they weave their own personal narrative. And Katy, over to you. We've also talked about the kind of the personal implications and the personal nature by which we're all kind of living together remotely right now. Share with us your thoughts on this.
Yeah, I mean, going back to the original question, just in terms of like remote work and how it will change, the landscape for us going forward. I hope that it allows employers to start thinking a little bit more proactively when they're opening a position or when they're looking to add to a team or create a new initiative that needs hiring behind it. I hope they'll consider, would we be able to, support this role working from home? Because I think what we all have to take into consideration is some people are a lot more productive from home. And I've been in situations, I had an employee years ago and even one now, who are thriving working from home. And we've seen major changes in productivity, you know, with the past employee that I'm referring to, where working from home, she was able to just get so much more done. She was more comfortable. She was just, you know, in her own skin, so to speak. So I think we actually have to start looking at the individual and saying what's best for them. And if the company isn't affected by that person not being there every day, I think that we can absolutely give more sort of leverage to allow people to work from home. You know, and an employer who was reluctant to do it in the past and then has 3 months of data, since we have all the technology to support it, of someone being really successful or at least the same as they were in the office, it's going to be a really tough battle to say, working from home doesn't work for us, because they're going to see that it does.
Thank you, Katy.
Mm-hmm.
Katy, that leads to my next question. Your expertise is in contract work, consultants, people in transition, independent contractor. Could you talk to us about the future of contract work and the impact to both the employer and the contractor?
Sure. Yeah, so it reminds me a lot of 2008, you know, when we went through a really tough time financially and the economy took a huge downturn. And you know, at the time I was placing contract employees in New York City, and we were all so concerned about what it meant for, you know, both contract and permanent employees. What we found coming out of 2008 and the 2008 recession, and why we didn't suffer terribly, nor did the company I'm with now, it was because the idea of bringing in a contract employee when times are uncertain is a lot more settling than bringing in somebody who you're committing to long term. So when we get out of this and departments have put initiatives on hold, projects on hold, work is just backed up because of layoffs or whatever it is, to be able to provide a solution to a client of ours and say, hey, you're behind, you don't know what you need yet to catch up, but why don't you just bring someone in for 3 months and see how it works? And then you can make the decision 3 months from now when your head's a little bit more clear. So I think that's an attractive option for employers. And I actually think that it will be the same way after this. I think, you know, you'll read a lot of articles about the gig economy and how they're being affected. And a lot of times people right now just have to start looking at their whole background, not just their most recent experience, and saying, what do I have to offer? Like, what can I do? And kind of think outside of the box and get creative on what you can bring to the table, because people worry sometimes with contract work that it will hurt your resume, or I don't want a lot of contracts movement on my resume. Nothing on your resume for right now is going to matter or affect your future employment. People are going to be impressed by the fact that you sort of got a little more agile and took a position that might have been outside of your traditional path during a time like this. Everyone's just doing what they have to do.
And the fact that now people can work remotely and that they have proven that they can do it, because I think before you had to prove first your work ability before an employer would trust you into working remotely. How is this impacting your recruitment industry? Will you be going more global in recruiting people or nationwide? Or is it not really directly affecting your industry?
My company places professionals in technology, HR, accounting and finance, and administrative and legal, as well as sales. So we sort of have a wide range of what we kind of have to offer in terms of services. And so some are being more affected than others. A lot of administrative staff has been laid off. And so where else can we place them? Where can we use their skill sets? But technology is keeping companies alive right now. So a lot of people in help desk, situations are helpful to have working from home. So one implication that I think will be a little bit of a concern, but not a major one, is just you have to have the technology to work from home. So we've had a lot of clients reach out to us and say, hey, we'll hire this person, but can you provide them a laptop? Mm-hmm. So we're actually at the point as a company where we're about to hit our bottom of our inventory, and we'll have to start purchasing more laptops in order to allow people to work from home. So you have to kind of look at it cost benefit, what makes the most sense. If the company doesn't have technology for that person, but we can provide it, we absolutely will do that.
Perfect. Thank you, Katy.
Yeah.
And if I can just add a little something there, Neza, Katy brings up a good point from a technology standpoint and just the economic gap that this will present for some people who don't have, great, we might get the laptop, but if they don't have the cable network and the internet network to support, to have good, capabilities, that's going to play another role. So we're going to really have to get creative as employers to say, really, how are we supporting all of these needs and all the different facets? Because there are a lot of, people in my network I'm speaking with who talk about the fact that it's really hard to have the video call, despite the fact that everyone has the technology, because the reception is just so poor that, it's too staccato, it's breaking up, so they just go back to the phone. And so really going to come down to, okay, how are we going to upgrade the home technology so that we really can support the video call, which actually makes a difference, because it is this face-to-face that does bring the level of the communication and the collaboration that needs to happen to that next level.
Carmen, it's interesting how you always see it on a point of view of diversity and inclusion. And so how just something like this can again create that division where people are not equal in front of the opportunity. And that's a very interesting point to highlight, so that whether it is governments or nonprofits or companies that want to make sure that equality continues, they need to invest in training people into being equal in front of technology use and technology resources.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. And if we take it down to our school system, there's really a disparity. We need companies to invest in their public schools more. When I talk to some people and they talk about that their kids are only on for a half an hour a day with the teacher, and they're only learning one subject a day, versus, kids that, in better zip codes with the private schools, are on all day long and have one-on-one instruction, just like they're in the classroom. Well, you know what? Our kids are really the ones who are going to suffer more. So I know this is really at the, the corporate level, but, really we need our corporations to think about, we need to start a little earlier. We need to reach back and touch our public school systems and support them, because it's our children who are really hurting now.
And I'm wondering also, Carmen, you bring up such an interesting point from a corporate social responsibility perspective. Are companies going to actually come forward and offer different sort of public-private partnerships where they can also be a part of the solution, so that no matter at what level a company's recruiting and hiring and retaining a workforce, that they're thinking more about how to bridge the distinction between what used to be the division between personal and professional? Because if we continue on the route of remote work, which I think for some time we will, if not much going forward into the future, as we reinvent and pivot across all different industries, that's going to be an important factor for not just how companies recruit and maintain mid-tier, top-tier talent at the senior level, but then also how they're bringing in, essential workers, for example, and how can the CSR space for companies revive itself and be a part of the solution.
Absolutely. That's going to be critical in this time. Our senior leaders are critical. We need to make sure that we do have leaders, because it is those innovative leaders who can think outside the box. Those are the companies that are going to survive, and those are the companies that are going to evolve and think of other ways to reinvent themselves. I have a friend whose company is manufacturing, and they changed their plan to make PPE masks. So right on the cutting edge, as soon as you realize, wait, I'm a manufacturer. I shouldn't manufacture what I was doing before. I've got to quickly adapt, be flexible, and change.
Mm-hmm. That actually also is a good segue into our next question, actually, around those companies that have been able to stay really innovative and pivot fast and be responsive, versus those companies who lagged a bit and then weren't able to stay fresh and relevant and current. And maybe those were those industries where they were already lagging, and they were already, when we think about retail and apparel, for example, there have been brands that have been very quick to pivot and change and adopt and be flexible and want to, give back and to help. And then there's those companies in the same vertical, the same space, that haven't. So I'd be interested to hear from both of your perspectives from a recruitment and leadership and corporate culture perspective, how all of that interweaves into what we're seeing now. Carmen, let's start with you and then we'll move to Katy.
Yeah, it's really been interesting to watch people's behavior patterns change in terms of how we are adapting to our quote unquote new normal. And it's those companies that are being creative to be out in the forefront and talk about how they're there for their community, one, and then two, how they're shifting to make sure that they're staying in people's eyes, say, hey, we are essential, or we're still alive, we're still working, you can come use us. Those are the differences that we're seeing in terms of, how people are shopping, how people are spending their money, where they're spending their money, and with who. So it really is going to take those thought leaders to make sure that they're being front and center with that. And you're seeing that the companies that were lagging, the companies that were less diverse, the companies that didn't, and when we talk about diversity, we're talking about diversity of all layers. I think a lot of times when we say diversity, people want to think to race or gender first. But there's so many layers to diversity that are now become more present to people too. Mm-hmm. So those companies that truly were the most diverse were really the ones that are been able to react the fastest because they had that mindset already.
Thank you, Carmen.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really just comes down to trying as best as we can, even though when you're in a crisis, you tend to be more reactive than proactive. I think it's really important that people start thinking, especially now, what the next 3 to 6 months will look like and what will that mean. And you can have your finance teams forecast numbers, for sales organizations. And now that we have, a month or so of data to see what happened, we can start to kind of annualize that and say, okay, where are we going to be in 3 to 6 months? And then start planning for that time period. I think it's really easy to sort of use this time as a chance to regress or a chance to sort of get stagnant in the way we're doing things and just try to stay alive. But we really have to kind of think down the line and say, like, for example, with my firm, the question we kind of keep asking ourselves is, what do our clients need right now? Because they don't necessarily need employees. Like, a lot of people are on hiring freezes, but that doesn't mean we're just not going to call them or not keep in touch with them. So one thing we started was this weekly speaker series that we're doing on Fridays to bring in people from all different industries, bring in people from all different, types of expertise to say, here's something to end the week on a positive note. We've had a Navy SEAL speak. We've had, a career coach speak. We're having a yoga session coming up and a more of a, HIIT workout coming up. So we have all these different things that we're trying to provide, and we open it not just to internal employees, of course, but to all our candidates and all our clients to say, this is what we have going on this week. Join, and it's free, and get your mind off the day-to-day. So you really have to think, like, how can I be there for my client or my candidate in a different way right now? So I think that's what we all have to be sort of thinking about.
Katy, we feel that a lot of the shift, the abrupt shift that has been happening in consumer behavior in a lot of industries right now due to COVID-19 and this quarantine and this lockdown, it is also an image of a shift that has been happening slowly in certain industries that didn't totally shift to digital. And it just, it's that last layer of 2020 we're really changing into something new. And so in your industry, in the recruitment industry, what has been happening over the past 10 years that, if you could tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, well, one big sort of place to start that's always a topic of conversation in recruiting is virtual interviews versus face-to-face interviews when you're deciding on whether or not to represent talent. So for 12 years, I worked out of Massachusetts and placed candidates in New York City. And when I started, I remember thinking, how am I going to convince a client to hire someone I've never met? But what I found over the 12 years is it really forced me to get to know my candidates on a deeper level. I wasn't just curious how good they looked in a suit and if they made eye contact. It was a deeper level of really asking them what they've done, what they're like, making sure that their resume checks out and really digging deep. So I can't tell you how many times I had a candidate say to me over the years, you spent more time with me and asked me more questions than anyone I've ever met in person. And I'm like, because I have to, you know, and references obviously are a great thing to go off of when you're not meeting your candidate in person and always. But the company I work for now, and I truly believe this is a great way to do business as well, is, you know, meeting everybody in person. That's the goal, that everybody that we work with, we're a local company, why wouldn't we meet them? And to be honest, when you meet a person face to face, you do have a different relationship. You remember things about that first meeting. But I think we have to move to sort of an environment where both the candidates that we work with, the clients we work with, understand that there's nothing wrong with or lessening about meeting somebody, you know, over Skype or Zoom or whatever that might be, because you can have a really deep and authentic and real conversation that way and build a relationship that way. So I think that will change drastically. There used to be, I felt, you know, a decade ago, this sort of unwritten rule that you didn't make it clear that you didn't meet the person, but if you were asked, of course you would never lie, but you know, it was like you weren't bringing that up left and right. And I think what's important is that we're transparent about that and we give as much of a heads up on what the clients, you know, should be expecting when they meet a candidate. But I think we're all going to have to be way more flexible around that. I mean, there's national firms that do everything over the phone and are very successful and place very good candidates. So I think that would be one major shift.
Thank you. Yes, no, definitely. I think there is no shame into having very important meetings now on Zoom and Skype. I mean, didn't want to name them, but those virtual companies that allow us to have those meetings. And yes, those meetings used to happen on a small level, but then on a high level, the more important the meeting is and the more you need to physically be there. And now this is going to change. People will not get into flights and airplanes to just have a meeting. I think everyone is going to reconsider that. So still to you, Katy, on the diversity and inclusion aspect, we know that inside the companies they have created head of diversity and inclusion, but through a recruitment company, what have you been doing there, and how sensitive were you to this topic on gender equality, but also on other discriminations that happen out there, whether they are racial or others? Sometimes it's age, sometimes it's linked to a health condition.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so our diversity and inclusion mission kind of falls under our HR umbrella, of course, and we, you know, have recently been having way more conversations about diversity and inclusion based upon the fact that we just acquired a company in October that had a huge diversity and inclusion mission. They were known for it locally in Boston. And so we're really getting to learn a lot from them and a lot from what they've sort of taught us about the successes they've had. So I think it's really just making sure that we empower recruiters to know the right types of questions to ask when interviewing candidates, to help them, and also it's helping the folks that are on the phone with the clients to understand what's not okay to ask for in a job description and what is, and helping them to really kind of guiding them through, okay, well, I don't think that's exactly what you're looking for, but you know, what if we showed you a, you know, diverse pool of candidates that had all different types of skill sets? So, you know, we're the middleman, and of course we don't always agree with what our clients think is the perfect profile, but it's really just being comfortable enough to have an open conversation about what this role really is, what it needs, who will be best for it, and then coaching our recruiters to go find those people in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah, clearly to create the influence, and that has an impact, you know, even if, as you said, you don't end up imposing on that special transaction what you would have wanted to the client, but you're building an awareness that in the workplace there should be more diversity for many reasons.
Sure.
You know, I think it's interesting because, as we know, over 22 million Americans are now unemployed. And a large part of our ecosystem and our network, we're female corporate executives, we're entrepreneurs, we're business owners. Many of us are pivoting and in transition. And many of us will be, out there either recruiting new teams or ourselves possibly thinking about a change. And now with so much of this happening in the digital space, in the sense of the recruitment, the hiring, the ongoing just performance management pieces of it, what advice do you have for women, men who are listening to our show and really advocate for equity in the workplace as well, as we're thinking about ourselves moving forward to the new future? How do we think differently about everything from the job search to hiring diverse teams to, are there specific tips and tactics that you think would be helpful for all of us to know, as we're, everything from interviewing now online in the digital space to, extending offers and thinking through compensation and benefits packages as well? What would make the world a better place as we think about embracing a more diverse workplace and making sure that we're all a part of the active solution in hiring for that? Carmen, let's start with you and then we'll go to Katy.
Yeah, it's about hiring for the active community. As you were talking, my brain was just racing about, all the possibilities that this new work environment opens up for people. I think about the families who said, well, I can't afford to have someone come into my home because of what my skill set for the job I'm going to get will pay. So I have to now put my career on hold. Well, that doesn't need to happen anymore, because now I can be at home, I can make money, I can work because my kids are right in the other room, so they're still being supervised, Or I think about some of our, employees who have disabilities that they wouldn't allow them to commute to work, but now they can, because commuting to work just means going in front of their computer. So I think it does open up a brand avenue for people who were overlooked in the past, or who their mindset was thinking that they weren't qualified or they weren't able to go after the job. So I think it's a two-way street in terms of companies have a wider, pool to choose from. And as, candidates, we now can put ourselves up for more jobs as well. And as we're working towards this, new digital world, I think we all can probably think about the new technology and new digital things we've learned over this last month, and so this is a prime opportunity for you to learn a new skill set. You're at home, maybe you aren't working. So what skill set are you picking up? What are you doing now during this time? Because it's all about the story that you're going to tell. And what employers need to hear is how you had a growth mindset, how you came to the situation and shifted your perspective from being, negative about, or feeling like the victim in the situation, but saying, I use this time to empower myself to upgrade my skill set. And, it's that power of how can I use this time? It's like, I think about how many times do we wish the world could stop so we can get some work done? Well, the world has stopped. We can get so much done now. So all those things we didn't think we had time for, I actually think we do now have time for. We're not spending 2 hours commuting anymore. So that's extra time that we have to be in our households with our family. As we think about what corporations are doing to connect with their employees, they're coming up with happy hours or coffee time, and really being intentional about the time that they're spending with their employees and how they're actually still going to make that connection and collaboration and just intimacy happen. And I think all of that is really just exciting for where we are if we just make sure that we're shifting our perspective and making sure that we're able to work from a place of what's the opportunity here.
It's interesting, Carmen, because I also think that, I'm wondering for women as well, and for networks like the Mayshad ecosystem, if it also gives opportunities for women to feel like they can more fully step into their power, right? Because we often talk about, we knew that this happened after the 2007-2008 market collapse, where particularly in the greater New York City area, a tremendous number of women over the age of 40 were laid off from their jobs. And many of us then went on to launch new businesses or to take that side hustle into a full-fledged entrepreneurial venture, or look for something very different outside of your comfort zone. But that was a very different moment in time because we weren't all digital then. Now I'm wondering if we're in a similar moment in time where we know 60% of all of the people that in the United States that have filed unemployment claims are actually women, and that number will probably continue to grow. This also presents an incredible opportunity for women over 40, over 50 to find new vibrancy in how they think about pivoting and reinventing as well. I'd love to get your thoughts on that.
I always think that there's a time to, pivot and reinvent yourself. As you're listing off those statistics, I'm like, woman, yes. Over 40, yes. Reinvent yourself for time, yes. So, you really bring on some really great points. It's really sad to see, the different buckets that are really affected by what's happening now. It's really just exemplifying the inequities that had existed before. And I think I'm hoping that it's that awareness now and the stark numbers that are being presented that people can now understand that it's not just a squeaky wheel getting the oil, but really this was an issue that needed to be addressed. And we have a lot of great talent that is going to get lost if we don't pay attention, if we don't wake up and start putting this talent to work and really start elevating ourselves. So it starts with the self. It starts with saying, what can I do to reinvent myself? What is it that I'm passionate about? What skill set do I need to upgrade right now? And then being bold and getting out there right now, and then having the employers on the other side being more open and flexible and, thinking about, what's the word I'm looking for? I really want to say that they're being more open with how they're thinking about it and how they're receiving it. I think Katy mentioned it earlier in terms of the words and the ways at which employers are posting their announcements. How are they communicating about the jobs that they have open? How are they posting for it? How are they changing how they're going to attract talent to them as well? So it's a two-sided, everybody's got to shift. Everybody has to change. And it's really making sure that as long as we're all kind of realizing we're all in this together, we all are at a disadvantage, then we can all recognize what our advantages are and tackle them from that standpoint.
Carmen, to your point, I think that now is the time, as you're saying, to completely re-question ourselves and to stop, most importantly, to stop resisting to the market. And I think that's also something that we've been seeing before this specific moment is, and Katy, I'm sure you might agree with this, it's a lot of people who are not finding work are also people who just want to stick to an expertise that might not be as relevant in the market as it used to be, whether a position or a title or a specific skill. And so I think what this is teaching us, most importantly, is that we cannot resist the changes of the market. And just earlier on a conversation with a friend where we were kind of like catching up on business ideas, I said, look, if you're going to think of the next genius business idea, you need to think of something that could work right now. If that idea can work right now, if right now you can find clients, if right now you can find clients and a business opportunity for it, then it's most probably something that will work even better later when things get looser and get back to a more empowering workplace. But if you're thinking of something that would not work at all right now while we're in quarantine right now, then it's most probably something from the past that will not live through this. So yes, so this time is a positive time for us to all re-question what is our relevancy in the market. And this is something with Jan, we have this conversation all the time because it is also something that we try to bring across to our network with the events and the workshop, everything that we create here. And now this time of silence is the time to work on that and to re-question ourselves and not just think that the world is the problem, the market is the problem. It's like, I'm not lucky, I'm not finding a job. And so it takes me to my next question to you, Katy. In the recruitment industry, what is the biggest challenge? And I'm just curious, is it more finding clients or finding talents?
Well, it's interesting because, if you look back to January, February, and the prior year, we have been in this market where there has been so many jobs available and not enough good talent, right? So, from a recruitment perspective, it's been really challenging to find, candidates for jobs because the unemployment rate was so low before all this happened. So, there was the issue of trying to find good candidates, and there was the issue of trying to get your clients to be more flexible to find candidates that had maybe slightly left of center background that would still work for the job. So it's really interesting that it completely changed overnight almost, as it seems, where now we're going to have this huge workforce available that's unemployed and ready to get back to work. I think Carmen said it perfectly when she said, if you're not using this time to learn something, to progress yourself in some way, whether it's as, robust as learning a new language or, something as simple as, being able to better balance fitness and your work life, you really don't have an excuse now because you have more time, you're saving time. I mean, there's so many things that women and men across the board say, I wish I had more time for that. I wish I could do that. And so we do have a little bit more time now. But then there's the flip side of it too that's challenging. And I know this is a little off from your question, but there are a lot of households right now that are splitting time between two working parents. Like, for us personally, we have a 5-year-old and a 2-year-old. So during the day, it's shifts. We make the schedule every night before the next day because my husband and I both have pretty spontaneous schedules with our work. So it's creating 2-hour shifts throughout the entire day. The days go by in like a blink of an eye. But, so I think, and Jan and I spent a lot of time talking about this before, you really have to bring some humanity back into it because you might be right in the middle of firing through a to-do list of 15 things, and you might get on the phone with someone who just finished 3 hours with 2 3-year-old twins. Who knows? And so where their mindset isn't where you normally would have found them in their office plugging away. They've just come from this other world and are now entering back into work at 2:00 in the afternoon. So I think the whole silly, my dad always jokes, he hates the question of how are you? It's just so simple and not that deep of a question, but that becomes really important now. Like, how's it going? How are you guys holding up? I mean, we're all asking that to each other, to our neighbors, to our friends. And I think that's a big part of what our conversations need to start with. How are you doing? How's everybody in your family? Someone could have just come off of being on the phone long distance with a family member who's really sick and suffering. And so you don't know what everybody's working with at home. And without becoming, too bold to pry into people's personal lives, I think you have to kind of find out what you're working with when you hop on, one of your intense work calls throughout the day.
Sure.
I just wanted to tap into that because, Katy, you're so right. We're taking this to a new level of humanity, before it was, hi, how are you? But you know what? I'm on to the next sentence and I haven't even given you a chance to respond.
Right.
And it's just amazing how that question means something so much more now. And it is, and people are actually taking the time and asking because they really care about the answer that people have. I am an avid runner and I love when I go running, and now people wave to one another with such a great to see you out here. It's just a different wave that we're giving to one another. Or the messages that are in people's driveways, is not with all the chalk. It's not just a flower or some hopscotch, but it's thank you to our workers, so blessed to be alive. Thank you. And it's really a beautiful thing. And I hope that this level of humanity and caring for one another is the one thing that goes into our new normal, because I think it does make a difference. And, I think we'll see productivity go up across the board because we all have had issues that we've been going to work with and we're always afraid to address. So been trained to say, when someone says, how are you? Just say fine, because no one really cares. Right. And so, happier people produce happier results. And so hopefully I think, we'll take how do we make people happier, into the new normal.
I think you both have really hit the nail on the head here. And we talk about this a lot with Neza and the team at Mayshad too, around bringing more humanity back to how we connect and communicate and engage with each other. And we usually think about that from a networking perspective, right? But particularly in the workplace, I think now, as we've been speaking here, is a great opportunity to take a step back and really reflect on how we show up as human beings each and every day. And sometimes we play the role of leader and CEO and founder and business owner. Sometimes we play the role of employee, and sometimes that's fluid back and forth. I'm wondering, how can we as leaders and managers empower our employees to feel like it's a safe enough space, given all the unemployment claims and given how quickly things are just shifting in the sense of job security isn't what it was even just a couple of months ago, but yet to where employees and the people that we work the closest with can feel like they have a safe space to be able to say, you know what, the last couple of hours really wasn't great. I'm here now, but just know where I'm coming from, Katy, to your point. Because I think it's also our responsibility to ensure that we're creating those trusted spaces where people actually feel safe to say, instead of saying, how are you today? And the normal response is, I'm great. Like, how can we entice and encourage them to be more authentic and more real so that we can be a part of the solution-making process with them?
I can go first, Carmen, and then.
Yeah, I felt like I was talking too much. Go ahead.
No, not at all. I think, it's funny. Communication's huge for companies right now, right? Because we don't have the platforms that we used to on a daily basis. And I think, my company's had, I would say 4 or 5 company-wide calls over the past month since this started. And we're a 150-person company. So we all get on a conference call and, get the state of the state for how things are going. And on the second one of those, it was unfortunately expressed that we were going to have to do a pretty sizable layoff. And so after that, followed the individual phone calls to staff and to let them know some were furloughed, some were laid off. And that was very challenging and very difficult for the owners of my firm. So now every time one of those calls comes up, it's funny, one of the partners that owns my company even put in the last one, no bad news, we promise, so to get ready for this call, but no bad news. And I think as leaders, if we're not doing individual calls like that with our teams every day or every other day, or for whatever cadence makes sense for your team, I think we're really missing a crucial piece of our responsibility as leaders. I've switched my team to daily calls at 9:30, and sometimes they're 15 minutes and sometimes they're an hour, but we need that touch point every single day to be able to say, hey, what do we have going on? What happened yesterday? And sort of recap things. So I think we have huge responsibilities, and this is kind of where we started this conversation as leaders, to make sure our people feel safe and feel like they have a voice and feel like they can talk about the things that they're thinking about, and not always about work, just about what's going on at home, like we said before. But I think it becomes very easy as leaders to operate in a bubble in the workplace, but even more so now because everybody's out of sight, out of mind. And yes, there have been over the past month some urgent, quick decisions that were made in order to pivot in the right direction and keep companies alive. And some of those things had to happen in a bubble with 5 people making the call versus it being open to a lot of people. But as we move through this and we start to operate a little bit more business as usual from home, I think we need to remember, especially if it's like a new initiative, who should be involved here? Cast a wide net. If it's something like ramping up your diversity and inclusion or coming up with a good hiring strategy for the next 6 months, get people at all levels, all generations, all types of minds in the room to start at, a focus group of 25 people, and then pare it down as you get closer and put together an action team of 5 or 6 people. But I think we really have to remember that's a big part of inclusion that I think is really important. We're scared to bring all the same people to the table because maybe they might show us up or think of something we thought of already or make us look bad. But it's so silly and professionally kind of immature to think like that. So I think we need to remember right now, okay, I can have as many people as I want on this Zoom call. So let me bring everybody to the table and actually hear everyone's voice.
And there's a lot of value with bringing multiple generations to those conversations in the workplace now, right? As well as bringing the senior level executives who may be in the Gen X or baby boomer age category with the Gen Ys and the Gen Z, is that right? Is it Gen Z now? To the conversation as well. And, it's interesting as we think about like, what does this compare to in the past, right? Is it 9/11? Is it Hurricane Sandy? Is it, whatever the natural disaster or the pivotal moment in time is? And Katy, you and I were having a conversation just around the fact that, older generations can bring so much value, because we often think it's the younger generation that's much more familiar with technology and much more familiar with just the way in which the world's shifting so quickly. But it's actually the older generations who have a very different perspective of what's happening right now that's incredibly valuable. And encourage you to talk a little bit about that as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's kind of funny when you're recruiting, and especially when you're a newer recruiter and you haven't been through a recession, it really toughens you and it makes you into a really good recruiter, because you're not just having resumes pouring in, or you're not having clients just constantly asking for candidates. So I think for people that are newer to their careers right now, really talking to older, wiser peers that have been through things like this and saying, what was it like when this happened? What was the aftermath? What did you learn? And almost sort of be a student again, and encourage your younger workforce to kind of lean on people who have been through things. I think, and Jan and I talked about this, I think when you are looking at, like we said, new initiatives and things like that, you should get people from all across the board to put in their opinions. But when it's something that one, I mean, no one's been through anything like this in our lifetimes, but something close to it or something comparable that you can say, what was it like? Where did you find the most success? Or what were the industries of your recruiting that were hiring or that will hire out of this? And kind of thinking, being forward thinking, that's going to help you quite a bit.
Thank you, Katy. Carmen?
Yeah, it's all about being forward thinking. And, this is definitely where you need a little bit of the old and the new. It's the old that can tell you we will make it through. When we think about some of the catastrophic events that you mentioned, Sandy or 9/11, while those were big, those are really to one section of the world that experienced it. So it was really isolated. Versus maybe the housing market for the U.S., that's something that we can kind of feel that was more similar, maybe because more of the U.S. was experiencing it. But then still, that was isolated to the U.S. Yes, other places felt it as well, but not like we did in the U.S. So this is the first time where it truly is happening globally. And I mean, to Katy's point, never in our lifetime have we seen, countries shut down, and something that's happening and everyone's feeling the effect of it. So it's really about, to what Neza was talking about earlier when she was talking about the story with her friend. What can we create today? What can we do today to solve today's problems? And then coupling that with what Katy said, and what's going to happen when we come out of this? And really looking to our older generations, our more seasoned employees, to say, how have you come out of similar events or other stifling events? Because nothing's been similar, but other stifling events. And that will really help us. And then taking the younger generation and saying, now what technology do we have on a digital basis that may help us get there faster? I love the stories that I hear about our young taking their 3D printers and making, masks and doing, special things with that when they didn't buy it for that. That wasn't the initial intended purpose. And if we look at that with everything we do, what was the initial purpose, but how can I use it today? And how can I stay on the cutting edge? That's where we'll see the difference, And Jan, if I can just go back to another question that you mentioned earlier, it's about the questions that we ask, and how managers can really make a difference now is taking that how are you question to the next level, right? I do a lot of executive coaching, and one of the things that I'm talking about with my clients are, how can I really let them know that it is safe? And I said, well, what stories have you shared about what you're dealing with and how you're going through it? You being vulnerable first will let your employees know that you're human and that they can be human back to you. And start changing the question from just how are you, saying, tell me some things that you're doing to cope. By asking the question like that, lets them know you're giving them permission to say that they are dealing with something, that they are coping, versus just how are you, where they feel like they have to say something positive, but you're actually being more intentional. So It's ask better questions, you'll get better answers, and be vulnerable yourself and show your human side, and you'll allow that space for your workers.
And I love what you just said about, because a large part of that is also about listening, like taking more time, because I honestly think that through the technologies, we also become much more laser focused because you're here, we're together, right, communicating. And so there are fewer distractions because you know that you're here having this conversation, right? And so I think it's also, to your point around just, understanding that sometimes listening is more about asking rather than just telling, right? And I think that there's a lot of new opportunity for that as well.
It's interesting what you said, Jan, because it's true that we've been distracted by technology as we were in the physical world. And now that we are on the technology, we are not distracted because we are using it. And it's interesting because we're experiencing a new level of focus as well. And so I think our mind was in a shift in between to trying to be in a physical world that was becoming also virtual. And yes, now it's more focused. And another point before I let you go to the questions of the audience, Jan, I have personally always been fascinated by the human mind and trying to understand what is it that makes people strong and have that ability to rebound, to survive and thrive. And my own curiosity took me to different places in the world, took me to different continents, and especially going across generations and across social classes. And you could recognize that strong element that could be someone in the street, but that is strong. And then you would go at a high level of society and you would sense the sickness and the insecurity in a person. And so I think that ability to adapt is what made people across generation the most successful. And that's what you were describing, Carmen. And I guess also companies as well that have been resisting the change into the diversity and inclusion topic, into the gender equality topics, those who just kept that resistance and kept ignoring those aspects until they got hit by an #MeToo movement, and that's when they went to adapt. Or today, with the COVID-19, those same companies will have a problem adapting to the new to the upcoming new reality, when the ones that were much more open to that evolution that takes us to wanting a better world, wanting a more ecological world, are the same ones who will be able to go through this stronger. And I'll let you, if you have a comment to this, ladies, or we can go to the question.
I think you're exactly right, Neza. It's the companies that are able to stay in the forefront and be adaptable, and to think about, if you just think about some of the companies that don't exist today, from the past, it was the ones who thought that they had, and they were giants, they had a great product. They were cornering the market, but they cornered that market and then they never thought ahead about what was around the corner. And so if we just learn, again, from the past, you have to make sure that we're always staying one step ahead. We're always reading about what's happening in the world to say, wait, how can this affect me? I think this is truly opening our eyes to recognizing that we can't live in a bubble. We can't just pay attention to what's happening in our backyards, but we really have to be present to what's happening on a global basis, and then recognizing how we are all woven together, making the same fabric. We're not as different as we'd like to think we are, and that we really need each other, no matter where we are, to make it work. Because we see what happened, what started in one place of the world, and how it's affected the whole entire supply chain.
Are codependent. We're from the same ecosystem, and we are codependent, and there is so much learning to have from different markets when we are humble and we are curious to know what is happening in other markets.
Absolutely.
Jan, have the question
Yes,
come
we
up.
have some really interesting questions from our audience. Please feel free to continue to submit questions, and we promise that those that we don't have time to get to today, we'll make sure to follow up as well in our ongoing conversations on this topic. So the first question is about the title of our show today was actually The Future of the Office. And this conversation has been intriguing from the perspective of it actually is humanizing. We're talking about the office more as a living, breathing entity. It's a collective of people, it's a culture, it's an identity, but there's also physical space attached to most offices. And so two-part question. Number one, what's going to happen with all the real estate? And many of our listeners and viewers today are in New York City, so that's a crucial concern. But then as we think about, everyone else who's with us today who operates either in suburban areas or holds real estate in major commercial markets as well, there could potentially be a lot of space going forward. And so for companies, how are they going to re-envision the use of the physical office? Will it be relevant? And if so, outside of just reconfiguring office spaces to be 6 to 7 feet apart so that people are still practicing good social distancing practices, then what happens to that space? Right outside of that, as companies continue to evolve and Carmen and Katy, to your point, stay relevant and current and ahead from an innovation perspective.
Carmen, do you want to go first?
Yeah, so I think it is going to take, it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out. I do believe that now that companies are seeing how productive people can be working from home, we'll see more of that. But at the same time, one thing that we were looking at is a lot of companies were reducing, their workspace and really getting people working closer together in the offices. And so that workspace will have to be redesigned now, because I do believe that this social distancing is going to be something that's going to last. And then they recognize, how germs can be spread, very quickly. So, especially in New York City where space is tight, I think, blessing is that now we don't have to worry. We don't have to do more of or maybe we'll do more of the hoteling that people have been doing with office space. But now I think, companies will feel more open to saying, you know what, if you want to work from home, you can work from home and it's okay because we only have space for 10 desks in the office now in this new collaboration. We don't have to try to figure out how we can make what could fit 10 desks, 30 people. Because now we know that we can be effective with half of our group working from home and only bringing people in at the same time when we need to. So I think it's going to be a great challenge for our architects out there to reconfigure the workspace. But I do believe that we're going to see a lot more people, continuing to work from home. And I think people who always wanted to work from home are realizing that it's not all that it's cracked up to be. And I think there's some people saying this is better than sliced bread, so.
Yeah, I agree completely. And I think, too, I don't fear that we will completely go to a remote workforce forever. I think companies will hang on to real estate, at least for the foreseeable future, and look at it more as like that's your hub, that's your headquarters, that's command central, that's where everybody comes when, big meetings are happening or you need to collaborate with somebody in person. I think the majority, I shouldn't say the majority, but I think a lot of people still really like getting up, getting into the office, whether they're in a city or whether it's just getting out of your house. I don't think people are wired to be in their house 24/7, especially if they have kids and just constantly be home. So I think a lot of people will really be itching to get back into a workplace, but I totally agree that it will be very interesting to see the way they're reconfigured and redesigned to be a happier, healthier, a better place to coexist.
It's interesting. I was speaking with a friend who's in India, and he's a tech guy and does a lot of things I have no idea, couldn't even tell you what he does exactly, but he works with big tech companies. And he was talking about how the notion of cluster work. And so for much of the sharing economy that revolved around, co-working spaces and lounges and people coming together and sharing space, that now what he's seeing happen is many conversations around when we do all come back to life, that cluster work is going to become really a new in vogue trend where it's not even necessarily employees of the same company that work together, but you're picking your tribe based upon who you want to spend time with and who you want to be around. And so that cluster could be not even people that work for the same company, but you're aligned and have an affinity toward people who, they may be your neighbors, or they may be, part of your book club, or they may be a part of your networking group, and you choose to be around those people. And with that comes a lot of innovative thought, because you're not always in that siloed sort of departmental perspective where you're around people that only just, per se look like you or act like you or work like you. So you were saying that in India, those are already some of the conversations that are happening. Our next question leads to kind of the bridge across this is, when we come out of this and we're allowed to return to work, and we know that that's going to be a gradual return to work, how do you, as a leader, encourage people who are hesitant and scared to come back just because of the spread of the virus, knowing that when we may come back, the virus may not be 100% contained and under control? How, as leaders, do we encourage people that they can feel safe and that we're protecting them in that and during that time?
I feel as though, I think the first thing that a lot of the diversity and inclusion specialists, the first thing I think they looked at when this whole thing happened was health and safety of their employees. And I think that's still going to be very much top of mind for employers, and it needs to be. And, I think we need to make sure that it's going to be communication. It's going to be level setting expectations, and also letting people understand, showing compassion, that people will be fearful to come back, but then also making sure that we're clear about the expectation on when they need to come back, and then giving them the support that they may need to get over their fears. We've all been listening to the news day in, day out, and sometimes if you really can't get truly fearful about what's going to happen next, even stepping outside of your home because of how it's all being portrayed. So merely making sure that you're giving your employees the resources that they will need, whether it's, counseling or therapy to get through this, because we all hold on to our anxieties and our fears differently, and recognizing that. And so I think it's going to be really important for employees to say, new health issues are going to emerge from this, and we've got to take it seriously. So when we have an employee who says, I'm scared to come back, that we have the right tools and the right resources to give them to get them over those fears, or to realize how we can still utilize our talents in another way.
And some of those measures designed to hopefully hold people in a safer, more transparent, more communicative space, do we find that there might be threats of intrusions onto people's personal privacy or personal rights? For example, this person writes, taking your temperature, having it be mandatory for temperature taking before you're allowed into the office. Or, in some cases where text messaging for, where you've been, or tracking of people's personal identities may come into conversations. What is the right balance as an employer plays in ensuring the safety of its workforce with intruding on what could be perceived as personal privacy issues?
Yeah, I think that's tough. I mean, that's gonna be a challenge for a lot of places to make those decisions. And I think some of it we have to kind of leave up to our local, state governments, just to be able to make guidelines for that for us. And, maybe not make them mandatory so that we can adapt to what works for our organization. But yeah, I mean, just piggybacking on the last question, we can't assume that everybody's going to be ready to jump in full force just because someone says, okay, you're allowed back in your office. So I think that's going to be all part of the same conversation of, okay, we just polled the audience, and out of, our entire workforce, 40% have expressed concern about coming back at this point in time. Okay, so then what do we do from there? Do we make mandatory temperature checks? Do we do this? Do we have staggered, hours so that people aren't all working at the same time? So I think we are going to have to kind of get creative with that stuff.
We have time for one more question. The final question is, people may be coming back to the office when we come back more authentic because they've been spending more time with themselves, discovering themselves, and connecting with people that they actually want to spend time with, or find that their authenticity is more important than fitting into whatever the corporate culture is. So this could mean dressing differently, or expressing your individuality differently, or coming out, or in all those different various ways in which previously one may have felt forced to hide their true identity. So how, as an employer, then do you reconcile that and provide them with the opportunities to stay and remain in their authentic self post-COVID-19?
I think people coming out and being their authentic selves in appropriate ways that's going to be the best, because when people are hiding, they're not able to produce their best work. If I have to feel like I can't talk about something that means something as much to me as as who my partner is, and I feel like I have to hide that and always have to spend energy on how I can hide something, that's going to reduce my productivity because I'm not going to be as happy. I think as long as if there is a corporate dress code, then you have to follow the corporate dress code because that's something different, right? But I think a lot of times people bring dress into it as a way to express themselves, but making sure that we are dressing appropriately and not coming in with ripped up jeans or a ripped up t-shirt, but we're looking appropriate. That's what I mean when I say appropriate. Then we should be allowed to express ourselves, and we should be our most authentic selves in the office place, recognizing that we still are in the office place, and that there are some things that we are authentic selves with our family, and that should stay with our family and friends versus, out in the public. But that has nothing to do with hiding who we are, And I think the more that we are our authentic selves, then all the work that we're doing to make the workplace more diverse and inclusive will pay off, because that's what we're paying for. That's what we're working towards, is to hear, what is your difference of opinion going to bring to the table? How can we stay that 1 foot ahead that we've been talking about? We do that because we're going to get diversity of thought versus groupthink, and the more you can be your authentic self, the more we'll get those authentic opinions and thoughts and ideas and innovations.
Thank you, Carmen. That's beautifully stated. I love the group thought, groupthink concept. Katy.
We should just have it where it's mandatory that our first day back in the office, to help with the transition, everyone wears pajamas. An easier way. Yeah, I do. I think there's going to be, to Carmen's point, a layer that's shed. I think there is going to be a little bit more of, being home for 3-4 months is very different for so many of us. So I think there will be an ability to kind of come back as a little bit more of your truer self. And I think that's a good thing. I think that's going to make companies and individuals stronger.
Katy, I come back how we've been on Zoom. The top half is stretched appropriately, the bottom half are pajamas.
like on the bottom, blazer on the top.
Yeah, exactly.
I agree.
Yoga pants from the bottom down and suit from the top up. Thank you. Thank you so much, Carmen. Thank you, Katy. Neza, thank you so much for hosting us again today.
Thank you. Thank you. It was an exciting conversation with both of your expertise, very focused on working with boutique firms, big companies, solopreneurs. I think it was an interesting episode for our audience today, because there are so many questions on what is happening next, especially in the workforce. Of course, we're questioning everything, but we are in most of the part consumers, and so we're wondering what the world is going to be. But what we're all going to go back to is work, and that's the first space where, yes, if we need to behave differently in restaurants, we will adapt to it, but what is going to be our work life? So thank you, everyone. Jan, thank you, and thank you to our audience, and then we hope to see you soon.
And please, please, please check out joinmayshad.com. We recently launched a digital membership for all of our ecosystem, our friends, our followers around the world to be able to join and have access to many different offerings just reserved specifically for members. So please join us in being a part of revolutionizing the way in which women network, connect, and form meaningful relationships together. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today.